Hi, Shawn. Just some brief comments on the data that you sent for the pre-Jasper testing in your river rocket. Um, I guess just some overall comments to begin with. You sent two data logs, one with a 20-inch pitch prop and one with a 21-inch pitch prop. Um, some initial, I guess, general comments is you pretty much started every run here. You did 3 runs with the first prop. You can see that here. I extracted the 3 full runs that you did to 800 feet here for the first prop, and just off the bat, you can see super consistent. If I align all of these together, it's like almost line on line in terms of RPM. That's what we're looking at here. You pretty much start every run because it's 280 electronics and it has idle speed control. You're starting, obviously you're giving it a little bit of throttle to maintain that speed, but you're starting at about 2,000 RPM, 7-ish miles an hour, and it's, like you said, about 9.1 seconds to get to 800 feet. We can look at that here. So around this point is where you get to 800 feet. This particular run was 9.2 seconds, but you're going about 90 miles an hour here. If we look at the GPS speed right here, GPS speed 90.1, 90, and 90.2. So super consistent. Honestly, these are some of the most consistent drag runs I've seen. Even between the 2 props, there's really not that much difference when you look at it like this. The better way to look at it is, let's say we look at GPS speed. We can look at these 3 runs, and wherever we click, we can see where you're gaining and losing here. So in particular, the out of these, if we go to XY plot, and instead of graphing speed and RPM, we can graph GPS longitudinal acceleration, and that's going to show us how hard the boat is accelerating at a given, on the x-axis here is GPS speed. So if we bring up the scaling here for this particular run, we're going to have 3 different runs that look very different now. Even though the RPM is identical, because the trim was slightly different, you can see this green run, the hit a little harder and then tapered off, but it was super stable and not really any porpoise at all. Where this red run, the maximum acceleration force is about 0.87 G, so that's 0.87 times the force of gravity, is about 23 miles an hour is where you're hitting. So the boat's jumping out of the water a little slower, but it's hitting harder once you do that, where this one jumps really quick, and all the area underneath the curve here improves your 60 foot. So it actually didn't hesitate right off the launch. The problem is this kind of is affected by trim. So the first run you did was the red one, the second run you did was the green one, which I think is the best, and the third run you did was the blue one. The green one had the best 0 to 20-ish miles an hour by a long shot. The red hit the hardest, but you porpoised a lot, probably because the trim, this could be a combination of trim, the wind or waves or anything like that, but you can see the acceleration force is a lot higher here, but then it dips below because the boat's grabbing water and probably from porpoising, and you can see how it's porpoising like that. But they all pretty much sign off at 85 miles an hour, and they just kind of plummet like you're mentioning. And if we look at the RPM at which that's occurring at, it's corresponding to approximately 8,000-ish RPM. Between 8,000 and 8,500 doesn't really do very much. The interesting thing is, if we look at, let's say, fuel pressure, super consistent, obviously, across all of the runs, 30, 39, 40 pounds. EGTs are also super consistent. They might not start identically, but that's just because of the slight differences in the idle speed and the water temp and the engine heat soak and all of that, but they're ending within like 10 or 20 degrees of one another, and they're very consistent. And then the RPM, also super consistent, almost line on line. So you can't look at the RPM, you can't look at the speed and kind of extract which one's better than the other. You can kind of see the trim timing or the manual trim if you're doing this manually. You can see by looking at the longitudinal acceleration force, okay, the red run here clearly was porpoising. It hit a lot harder, but when you actually go to time it, it's not as fast. So if we go back to this plot here, you can see how much the red run loses versus the reference here. By the end, it's pretty similar to the green. This is the time compare bar at the bottom, can tell you plus or minus from your best lap how much different it is. So all of these are within, the blue is 2/10 off, the green is 1/10 off your best time, and the red is just a little bit more than 1/10. If we go to the 21-inch pitch prop, that's this run here, and if we go to the bottom, you did 6 hits on that one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've extracted all of those as well. Once again, super consistent. Looking at the RPM traces, you can't really tell very much because they're pretty much line on line here. So this is what's looking at time or distance versus RPM. And when you start scrolling through all of these, you can't tell anything, obviously, because it's almost identical line on line. I'm including the time. Some people start timing from here, which is already half a second less, so 0.449 seconds. That's when the motor flashes to RPM. So there's the difference in time between when you stab the throttle to when the RPMs jump up is about half a second. Okay, and you can see for each of these runs, and it's pretty common that the teal or this light blue run is kind of your, or the green one was your best, which was the middle here. It's the 4th run. The first run, even though you probably didn't have the trim ideal, the motor will generally make the most amount of power on that first hit just because it's the coolest. And then after that, it slightly starts to decrease in power. But what we're seeing here is pretty similar to what we had before. If we look at the XY plot for all 6 of these runs, once again, super consistent with engine speed. Can't really tell very much, but the motor still jumps up to 5250 RPM-ish, where with the 20-inch prop, it's jumping to 5500 when you first stab the throttle. So as I'm flipping between these two, this is the 6 runs you did with the 21-inch prop. You can see here, it's only about 5250, and then it starts increasing from there. You're getting 250 RPM, and it's kind of hitting in that right torque peak when you have the 20-inch prop, and it's increasing like that. Comparing the two now, that's obviously which prop is better. Honestly, it's not a huge difference. If we instead compare GPS longitudinal acceleration, so you can see the wide spread between those 3 runs that we looked at for the 20-inch prop, the one that you porpoised, but when we look at those 6 runs, you were a lot more consistent here. You didn't porpoise as much on all of them. The initial hit isn't as much in terms of acceleration force compared to the other runs. Obviously, this one has a lot higher initial hit, like the other 2 are also higher as well, just because the 20-inch prop will have more mechanical advantage and it's hitting to 5500 RPM. But the way that they carry out all the way to red line is pretty similar amongst all of them. They don't really do anything different at the end. When we overlay all of them here, let's make these runs gray. We'll make all of the runs gray for the 20-inch prop, and then the colored runs are the 21-inch prop. You can see that one run that you had a really good initial hit even here. The 20-inch prop is generally better from 0 to 35-ish miles an hour. If you get the trim right, obviously if you get the trim wrong, it'll dip below the rest of these lines here. But if you get the trim right, it still kind of stays in the middle of all those runs, and you actually have a few that it's better from 65 to 85 here. So I would definitely go with the 20-inch prop. It's better. It has more margin of error because if you don't get the trim exactly right, it's still going to pull no matter what. Obviously, this one run that porpoised, I'd be curious to see what exactly that is. That was, I think, let's look at it again. It's not that one. Was it the first one? Yeah, so the first run here was the one that porpoised. So the very first test that you did, if you're manually trimming, that's understandable that it's going to porpoise. So once you had that sorted out, super consistent here. So I'll put that back to gray and we can compare. And they basically all sign off at 87 miles an hour-ish. You can see these here. the gray lines kind of plummet and only go 90, where the 21-inch prop will go 90. Let's see what speed that got up to. About 2 miles an hour more right at the end. So we'll go to the measures graph here, bring up GPS speed. We'll look at the peak speed instead of the longitudinal acceleration. And you're getting up to 90.7, 91 miles an hour. So it's about half a mile an hour better instead of 90.1. So not very much. Honestly, the 20-inch prop's the way to go. But the real thing is, why is it signing off at 8,500 RPM and not pulling anymore? And yeah, that's the ECU. It should continue to pull at 90 miles an hour. The motor still has enough power to keep going. And you held your foot down longer than that. So if we look at to bring up RPM again here. So as you mentioned, between here and here, which is 200 feet, the last 200 feet, it's not pulling. Between 85 miles an hour and 90 miles an hour, slowly accelerating. The way that you could tell that the ECU is the issue is you can see the EGTs start to climb. If we go back here, between 85 and 90, you can see the slope of the EGTs is kind of linear, and then it starts to hook between 85 and 90, and the reason for that is the timing retard that it's putting in the 280 ECU to hold to prevent it from over revving. So you could remove the rev limiter, but it's just not going to, in a 1 mile long straight, you'll continue to keep building momentum and getting top speed. But in these short runs with short props in drag racing, it's just going to build the EGT and not do very much. So 260 electronics will definitely help that. It'll hurt your consistency though. You'll definitely, I've never seen this type of consistency in any 260 engine. I've never seen someone be able to do this, but you get a little 250 RPM more with the 20-inch prop right off the hit. It's better because it accelerates harder from 0 to 30, and it doesn't really sacrifice anything between 30 and 90, and you get half a mile an hour less. That's the penalty that effectively you're paying. In terms of times, they're all fairly consistent, to be honest. You're half of a tenth, maybe like 0.05 seconds between most of them, except for the run that you had the trim issue where it porpoised. So the very first run there, I'll bring that back up. GPS, longitudinal acceleration. So this very first run here is the one that is different, but pretty consistent amongst all of them. The 260 electronics will definitely help. You're not going to gain 0.8 to go from 9.1 to 8.25 just by setup. I mean, this is pretty consistent, pretty optimized. You need, unfortunately, you need more power, and you need to make more power above 8,500. Reducing weight, and these props might not be the best for your class. It's not accelerating as hard as I would hope right out of the gate. Between 30 and 80, it's okay, but these peaks should be somewhat higher in terms of acceleration force with the right prop. So depending on your gear case combo and the prop, obviously sometimes we might see like 0.9 Gs, 1 G here. So another 20-30%. It'll still taper off like this, but this is the best way to look, okay, did I trim correctly? Where am I trading off? If you go to a 23 pitch prop, you're going to obviously sacrifice a ton of the low end acceleration potential here, and it's going to carry it out to the peak more. So like if we look at these two props are very similar, so I'll just draw a line here to kind of compare. Let's say the red is what we'll use. It'll look like this and kind of carry more, and it'll go 95-ish. So you're going to sacrifice all this area in here to gain this area in here, okay? And this is where you get all the ET, because you actually spend like 4 to 5 seconds of the run here, and this is only like 3 to 4 seconds of the run here in terms of, so that gives you an idea of where you're going to gain time and stuff like that. So sorry for the delay in getting you this info, but sorry, I was really busy over the weekend. Honestly, these two props are very similar, and they'll both run good. But if I were to choose, I would pick the 20-inch prop. It has more margin of error. The initial hit is harder. Yeah, you need to make more power at 8,500, and the stock 280 with a Simon 2 flash is not going to do that, unfortunately. So yeah, if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. I can give you the times for all of these, but it's not going to really tell you very much because you're still off where you want to be, and like I said, they're so consistent that and the setups are so similar, and your driving style is so consistent. It's not really going to give you a huge amount of information. You're ending at 90 miles an hour or 91 miles an hour in both cases, and that one inch of pitch is almost imperceivable. You get 250 RPM more. It hits a little better, and yeah, if you want to try different props like a 22 and see what that is, or different engine heights even, 5,500 RPM right out of the gate. I wouldn't want it to flash any higher than that. That's kind of where you'd expect. This shows it a little bit better. You're kind of just 250 RPM more across the board with the 20-inch prop compared to the 21, which is all the colored lines here. But between 0 and 35 miles an hour, as the engine's cavitating a ton, you're basically just flat on the RPM, which is what obviously you feel in the boat, and then it starts, the slip starts catching up, and the speed of the boat starts to give enough water speed to lower the slip amount. That gives you hopefully some background and some information to make some decisions. Yeah, like I said, if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to help. Thanks.